the cards are stacked in their favor. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a meritocracy. Team sports is not a meritocracy. So then he goes and wins the Super Rugby title. And now he's a genius, right?
Yeah.
And now everyone's like, what's the secret? What did you do that was the secret? The answer is neither. I get rid of another player. He comes in and he doesn't know any of the lifts. And so they sack me as a coach because the line-out goes to crap. They bring in a new coach and he says, I want to bring in 3 new players. It just goes, boop, 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 boop. Like it's one bad decision can lead to a tumble-down effect. Going to a club that's winning and copying their techniques doesn't make sense because what you're actually doing is copying an adaptation to a weakness that you don't have.
Welcome to Coaching Culture, the podcast about cultivating culture and leadership. I'm Ben Herring and I've been loving this side of the game for bloody ages. Today's guest is Ben Darwin. He's back by popular demand. Like, honestly, the feedback that we were getting to get this guy back has been huge, and so he's back. Little bit, if you didn't hear him the first time, former Wallaby tight head prop, broke his neck, retired, took up coaching, but then went into the data deep, went to the deep dive matrix styles, and his company Gainline Analytics are doing something really special in that they're measuring team cohesion, measuring what has long been held as unmeasurable, putting some real rugby science behind that other stuff and shaking up the way you think about cohesion and culture in your teams. Ben, welcome back to the podcast. What a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Man, so we have been chatting about a lot of things off air and we could talk forever. So we're going to pull out a couple. But I just want to touch on a phrase that we talked about last time, which was one of the big ones, which was just no one can outcoach the numbers. And I just love that, mate, that phrase. And so what I'd like for listeners in this episode is just to think about that concept, and you can dwell on it as you go. But we want to talk about this one, man, Ben, the monopoly effect. It's an intriguing name, and it's going to stir some brains up for coaches and leaders all over the show. What is the monopoly effect, and why is it important?
So it comes from a study from a guy at the University of California. I've actually been emailing him a little bit because I tend to like to contact people I hear things about. But he appears in this film, and it's actually about, the film's actually about inequality in the world and how people treat inequality. And they did this study where they got people to play Monopoly against each other, right? And they never met each other. They didn't know one another. But before the game, they got 180 pairs to play against each other. And before they played, they flipped a coin. And so one of them, if it landed on heads, the person who the coin was assigned to have landed on heads, they would be regarded as the advantaged player. Okay. So the advantage player would get $2,000 at the start. They'd get 2 dice, so they'd move around the board faster, and they'd get $200 every time they pass go. The disadvantaged player would get $100 every time they pass go, $1,000 at the start, and they get 1 dice. Okay. So you're fundamentally behind the 8 ball. And 180 out of 180 pairs, the coin person who lands on heads wins, right?
Yeah.
But they knew that was going to happen. And so what they're really interested in is how people treat each other and how people behave. So what they found was that the person who started to win started to kind of talk down to the other person and started to kind of not treat them very well. They would bang the pieces more loudly on the table. They would eat more pretzels, and they would start to bang on about how well they were doing, right? And then at the end of the game, they would interview both people. And when they said to everyone who won, why did you win? None of them attributed the win to the flip of the coin. Right?
Zero.
They attributed it to their innate skill. Okay. And so I automatically thought to myself, man, I've met a few coaches like that. And I've been that guy. Right. And what I mean by that is that it's like in that situation, a Monopoly player refuses to understand that the cards are stacked in their favor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not necessarily like it's not a meritocracy. Team sports is not a meritocracy. You know, one of the sayings I hate the most in commentary is, you know, the team who wants it the most will be the one who wins. And it's like, sure, I've been in teams where everyone's been trying enormously hard against teams who weren't even trying at all. I've been on games where when I was at the Brumbies, I remember playing the Bulls in '02, and it was literally like we're just wandering around the park because they weren't built at that point to win. They were later on, guarantee you, but it was literally the easiest game I've ever played because it just functioned so beautifully. So it's as coaches, I think we tend to not really recognize when things are in our favor. And so when we win, we go, geez, we're doing a great job, and we lose, we're doing a terrible job. And I think it's just a lot more complicated than that. And I think we really have to be reflective of, am I actually doing a good job here? Or am I simply just on the receiving end of a system which is fundamentally better or worse than the opposition? And so therefore, a number of different coaches could probably win this game. Some by more, some by less. Or any coaches almost would lose this game. So we certainly know when we talk to coaches who've been in losing teams, they are very aware of the inequalities. And I've always wondered, I wonder if they're more aware of the inequalities. But, when coaches say at the end of a game in a presser, I'm not going to say it's an excuse, but we did have 7 guys out this week. Right. But when a guy wins and it's the other team has 7 out, they don't say, to be fair, they had 7 guys out this week. We probably should have won them more. Right?
Yeah.
Now, when we've had conversations sometimes with coaches where we say, you've probably underperformed 10, 20%, something like that. We don't really do that very much, by the way, but that can really stir up some emotions for people. And it's, these things are very, very, individual results have so many variables and inputs. It's extraordinarily hard to tell. But the notion that maybe they didn't perform their best, even though they won quite regularly, can really stir up some emotions in people.
It's interesting with that because when you see some of those the most experienced, best coaches in the world, you actually see them. They're sometimes at their most grumpy, most agitated with the team after wins, when they know they could have done better. Some of the best coaches I know get their most angry when there's complacency creeping in a win.
The two I think of is Bennett and Popovich.
Yeah, exactly right. And is that just because they know that, they didn't perform to their best, that there was this, they had the cards stacked in their favor and they didn't smash the game. They cruise around the board essentially in that Monopoly example.
I think, we all enjoy feeling good winning games, right? But I think we start to strut a little bit too much. I remember coaching in Japan, and I was coaching at NTT and we beat this team by 100. And I remember sort of tears like, I can't step a foot wrong here with my coaching because teams aren't making any mistakes and we're just tearing them apart. But it's like, you think about when you're coaching a team, when you've had a really long preseason and you get a lot of detail into it, and then you have other scenarios like 𝐃𝐨𝐽 is now going to play this weekend. He's got 3 days prep coming into the game, right?
Yeah.
He's trying to get them to play against Arsenal this weekend. No detail would have been put into this game whatsoever. He just simply cannot control a lot of this, and he's probably going to lose the game. And he's going to be feeling probably, he's pretty good, I know, at sort of controlling his emotions, but he just does not have the level of detail. And some clubs are just built like that all the time. Some clubs are constantly in chaos, and there's a whole bunch of things that are also completely outside of your control. Like there's so many things about structure, for example, that are outside your control as a coach.
What sort of things are we talking, Benny?
So, one of the things we look a lot at is feeder clubs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you've got guys who are coming in who, if you take the Brumbies as an example, we used to have the Kookaburras, okay? And the Kookaburras was our feeder club. So if you had an injury, a guy would come in and he'd go, oh, hi guys, how you going? And he'd know 9 of the blokes and he'd know all the players and away you go, right?
Yes.
Now, the Kookaburras existing is not really inside the control of Eddie Jones or David Nucifora or whatever it might be. It's more the board. It's more structural, okay?
Yep.
Now, later on, the Kookaburras got thrown out of the Sydney comp. Then they went to the Queensland comp for a while. Then they got thrown out of that and they just couldn't exist anymore. So then for the Brumbies, when a decision is made to bring in a player, he's coming out of Randwick and he's never met anyone, and you've got to get all the detail into him that week. And he makes mistakes because he cannot remember to fold on the open side on the defensive read, right? Or he shoots out because he's used to doing it. Like when Jamie Roberts came to the Waratahs' first defensive play, he barneys out of the line. All the other players stay where they are because that's just what he's used to doing when he's playing for Wales or whoever he's playing for previously. So Now that player does it in the game for the Brumbies. Let's say he goes to the wrong spot. Somebody runs through that gap. You lose the game. Okay. Well, that's completely outside of the control of the coach, right? You're never going to get that amount of detail into him. You're never going to be able to build that instincts. And we know the cohesion numbers by our methodology would be different in game A to game B, right? Now, do that en masse and you have 3 injuries, and all of a sudden guys are coming from different places into your team, and all of a sudden it's just a lot harder, right? And so as a coach, there's games in the 70s, 60s and 70s where the All Blacks would lose to like a Northern England, or they'd lose to Munster or something like that. And it's like you had 5 or 6 amazing All Black guys been there for a long time. And then because guys are coming in they didn't have Super Rugby back then, they'd come in from basically the NPC, is that when the All Blacks made changes back then, they dropped off dramatically. They were dramatically worse. Right. So you remember in 86, I think, when they lost a lot of the guys because of the South African tour and stuff, they really fell away really hard. So there is a lot of components of the team you have and the group you have and the systems you have where you have advantages and disadvantages. So we know, for example, in Super Rugby, I think the teams with singular feeders have won 82% of the titles.
So when you're talking about, this is a cool one for the audience to listen to. So singular feeder, you mean there's one club that feeds this club rather than a multiple of, like, a smorgasbord of choice.
During the best days of the Crusaders, generally they're coming out of Canterbury. They can choose from elsewhere. And that was the gift that the Crusaders were given when Super Rugby formed, and the Brumbies were given when Super Rugby formed. Our advantage was where the Kookaburras and they had Canterbury. And because North Canterbury was another feeder, but wasn't in the top levels of NPC. Now they've gone really to Tasman more now, but they're still feeding off 2 when others are feeding off 3 or 4.
Yeah.
New South Wales has to feed off 13, right? That's why New South Wales makes it so hard for them. They're the biggest union. They should be the most dominant, but fundamentally the structure is so against you. Or coaching England, for example, it's hard because they're just coming from all these different clubs all the time. Whereas coaching Ireland, easier. Guess why? Because they're all coming from Leinster, right? So,
and would that be an argument for, when there's this big debate around international players going offshore and playing, that just opens up that even more, right?
It's a really interesting balance, right? Because like the Springboks are doing it now, and they broke the record for the most cohesive team in the last World Cup in the final. So in terms of their total shared experience, but one thing Rassie did is he got a lot of them out of Western Province, but then he also has held that group basically together for 2 to 3 years, even now sort of almost 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
So if you lose guys overseas, then the cohesion's going to drop away. But then if you come and then you say, no, okay, we're going to go with overseas-based players, when your local guys come in, there's no chance they've ever played together. So there's a complexity to it. It's like if we tomorrow decided that the Wallabies are going to go, we can only pick overseas players, and the starting 15 for the Wallabies moves overseas, the only way we would win a World Cup would be to pick from overseas, because we wouldn't have enough time to rebuild off local players.
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's a tipping point at which so many head away that you have to go for the overseas-based model, because then you can just keep picking everyone all the time, no matter where they go.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Rassie's been doing. But South Africa has many more layers under it than we do, because we have Super Rugby Club. They have Super Rugby Curry Cup, Vodacom Cup. So their engines, like the Sharks, they're playing 60, 70 games a year total, the whole organisation, whereas Waratahs are playing 18 games a year, now 21 games a year with this new system.
Yeah.
So there's a balance to it, and there's like I said, like this Australian soccer, if you went just for like A-League players, we would be annihilated, because none of them are built very well either. Because anytime they do well, like Central Coast Mariners a couple of years ago, built a really good academy-based club, that foreign guys just take what they want. So there's such a, like, the answer is it's incredibly complicated, but generally with clubs, the smaller the feeders you have underneath you, the easier it is, because there's more likelihood that guys have played with their teammates when they're playing their first game, and they can come into that environment more easily. And that stuff is not necessarily in the control of the coach. If you went to the Waratahs, you're not going to say, we only pick Sydney Uni players from here on in, because then you
No.
miss out on a whole bunch of talent, right, for the cohesion factor.
Yeah.
So you've got to, how can you structure things? And this is the conversation, for boards too.
Yeah. Well, I guess that leads us to the boards. Like, it's not always like some of the stuff you're talking about is big picture stuff, right? It's not always assigned to head coaches. It's the higher echelons of some of the stuff.
Yeah, it's about control. And one of the things too is and I hope you don't mind me sort of jumping to this, is like the problem is, in a way, that what I see with a lot of boards is, a guy will be coaching very well somewhere else and might be on the receiving end of a fantastic system, right? So sometimes they'll be the assistant coach at the Crusaders or at Hawthorn in the AFL. And so they go, we want that talent. Or there's a head coach overseas who's doing fantastically. Let's say you were coaching Leinster or something, right? It's like, we want to go get that guy because Leinster as a coaching job is the right gig. If you get an assistant job or a head coach there, just never leave, right? So, because a bad year is a semi-final loss, right?
Yes.
So let's say you're doing very well over there. Boards get obsessed about people who are being successful elsewhere, and they'll find a reason to get rid of the head coach. Like, oh, he's lost the group, and if they think he's lost the group, if they think he hasn't lost the group, they just won't go and ask the players. Or just look at the body language of the poor guy. Well, he's lost 9 straight, so what do you think he's got poor body language, right? And so it's almost like, well, we want to feel good about this, and it's just very much easier for the boards. Now, one of the problems here is, one, how we all interview as a coach, which is we'll interview, you'll say, I can fix the problem.
Yes. You have to say that though, right?
You have to say, I can fix it, I can turn it around. Okay, fine. And so they'll point to, oh, well, look, the defense is bad, I've been a defensive coach, or the attack is bad, I've been an attacking coach. And what we find is that they aren't necessarily able to solve that problem, right? Or the team has been on a rebuilding cycle. So, for example, if you look at Leicester, you had the current Waratahs coach was there and he was rebuilding. Then Checker comes in, the rebuild keeps going and they win the title. But from our numbers, I think like both coaches did great. One did not even get near the finals. The other one won the final, but both coaches did great comparative to what they had, because so this is the Waratahs coach. You have to forgive me. I need help.
Dan
McKellar was basically putting it back together again.
So what do the numbers say? What did your numbers say on this stuff? Like, what does it give you a spit out a number?
So basically, like it comes with first premise, home team should win, is more likely to win. So the away team's got to be 20% better. Second part is red cards kill everything. So just like if there's 2 or 3 red cards, just throw away the result, because it just has such a defined impact on the game. But all things being equal, let's say we're 70, 75%, depends on the comp. Like World Cups, like 92% or 90%, because World Cups, there's a have and a have nots, basically.
Yep.
Whereas in English Premiership, it's more even. But basically, if you are 20% better than the opposition, you should win the game. If you're 30% better, maybe you'll win it 80% of the time. If you're, 3 times the cohesion, you'll win that game 95% of the time. Okay. Yep. So if Leicester's here and the opposition is here, Leicester will win that game maybe 15%. Okay. Now, what starts to happen over time is you build through the season, your numbers start to come up, you get closer to everyone, and then so you start to win home games, and then sometimes you'll play a Newcastle Falcons, and you'll win an away game. And then if you keep that group together the next year, the numbers keep going up, right?
And so this is you're talking about the cohesion numbers, right? The connection pieces. So your key positions, how long they've been together, what sort of combination. Those are the numbers your data does.
Yeah, I'm not interested in output data at all. I'm interested in input data, right? Leading data before the thing occurs, right?
So that Leicester team, just in that example, had when those coaches came in, the cohesion was really low combinations, hadn't played a lot together. So that you're starting with a low base, and then those coaches essentially just trusted in what they did, built a lot of combinations, and it slowly crept up till.
And if you look at the back end of McKellar's season, they had some good wins, right?
Mm.
Then the group then stayed together for the next year. Now sometimes, I always love this about, Ranieri. When Ranieri joined Leicester City, is he joined with 8 days to go before the season started, because the previous head coach had been thrown out because his son made a sex tape or something, right? So anyway, and he was given so little time he couldn't make any change. And there was a huge advantage for him because they kept the same group from the year before. And then basically they had a lot of continuity inside the season, which might have been Ranieri, might have been something else, as the season goes on. And they all the senior teams that year kind of had injuries and had problems, and they kind of fell through this opportunity and won the title. England 03, kind of similar to that, because we were reloading with rugby league players a little bit. Mitchell kind of decided to move the senior players on. The Rand was creating problems for South Africa, so a lot of their guys went overseas. So the numbers were really bad for the 3 Southern Hemisphere countries. England kept the team together for 8 years, win the 03 World Cup. So there's a whole bunch of things here at play, right? But I'm not casting aspersions on either of those coaches or anything. Like, they all did great. Everyone did great.
I just think that example you gave about the Leicester City team forced to keep the same team, and I got given this piece of advice in my first year here. Actually, just a very experienced coach just said, just in the school space, just said, mate, just take the year and just sit back and just watch how it all plays out. Like, there's going to be a lot of things you don't know, and before you make any decisions around stuff which you don't know, watch how it plays out. And gosh, it was good advice. And a lot of things that I probably would have gone, nah, just on gut feel, got to get rid of that, do that, change that, would have been, if I'd done those, they would have been poor decisions, with the experience of sitting back for a year and just having the confidence to go, let's just see how this works, how this engine is working. And they just kept things in play. I thought it was awesome, but you can't always do that, can you? And like, there's a little bit of expectation sometimes. Like,
sometimes there's a mandate, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of these guys. They're terrible players. They're not performing very well. Or, there's a mandate to change. Do what you did at the last place. I have to match the success I had at the last club. And so one of the problems too that I find is with the boards, when they're sort of thinking to themselves, okay, we're not doing very well. Here's this guy over here doing fantastic. He's going to come in and fix it. And I was thinking about, I was watching Chernobyl again the other night, and I think there's a court case at the end of Chernobyl, and they're basically saying the Communist Party is basically trying to find someone to blame, and they blame the 2 or 3 guys who are in charge of the thing. And what they actually talk about is, well, actually the system was more likely at fault. But boards probably don't want to blame systems. They want to blame people, because people are much easier, because then you could just brush it off all to one side and say, okay, well, he wasn't very good. And if you look at the Crusaders, the hard decision was to keep the coach and say, hang on, maybe a system is a problem here, or maybe injuries were a problem. Maybe it's not, because that would be so easy to sack him after that season.
Well, what a glorious example of that, right? Like, the trust they had, and I know I had conversations with you about this previously, but there's a lot to be said about that decision, because the public pressure was pretty high and from a lot of groups. But it goes from
like there's all the old men yelling at their televisions, right?
Yeah.
And I remember talking to someone, my dad's farm, and I was saying, what do you think? Please help me with the coach's name. I'm sorry, I've just got so many in my head. Rob Penny. Because I think they were beating Queensland. We're watching a game, and I said, "Oh, do you want Queensland to win?" Or the Crusaders. He said, "I want Queensland to win because Rob Penny, he was terrible at the Waratahs. He destroyed the place." Right. So he was like, had this opinion of something that Rob Penny had done to him, or just had this opinion of the person. And so his narrative is Penny's a terrible coach, right?
Yeah.
So then he goes and wins the Super Rugby title, and now he's a genius, right?
Yeah.
And now everyone's like, what's the secret? What did you do that was the secret and stuff like that? And so, the answer is neither. He's a good coach, doing a good job.
Yeah.
But there's limitations inside of what he had. I'm not saying coaching doesn't make a difference. I'm not saying you can't make huge differences inside the construct, but a lot of the time the damage can be done by making the change you want to make, or you feel like you have to make, or like doing nothing is so much harder, or not understanding what you're seeing in front of you. I think a lot of the time, if you've coached a really well put together side and they're of a certain age, then you go to another club and you've got a team and you're like, look, they're all senior players, and they're great skill. Why am I now 0-3? Well, because maybe they're not actually, they're senior players, but they haven't actually been here for
Yeah.
they've been to other places before they come here, and it's not necessarily, it's going to take time to gel. So, one mistake that people tend to make is thinking experience equals success. And the classic I give with that is like the Panthers a couple of years ago won with the second youngest team in the comp. I think most of this year, the St. George Dragons are the most experienced team in the comp,
Yeah.
but they're not having a good time of it because they haven't played together enough, right? So the correlation between experience and success and is not as strong as people might believe it to be. So they'll see a senior team and go, okay, why aren't we winning? Because you're fundamentally built differently to the team that was winning.
Mm. I like him. Yeah.
So the other thing too I want to talk about, if that's okay, is
Well, just before we jump onto that,
Yeah.
Benny, just before we change it, I think it's important just to bring it back to that monopoly piece because,
Yep.
like when you talked about coaches changing and they go to a new club and they've been successful, well, then everyone thinks they'll be successful, but everyone's forgotten, right? In that monopoly example we started with it, they had that advantage. They had that card advantage in the first place. Now they're coming to a new place where they have the opposite. They have the disadvantaged cards. And that's where you've got to just acknowledge there is a big difference in what you're being given, right? And that's the bit you often forget, and your ego or whatever it is as a coach goes, no, I've got it. I've just been kicking ass over there. I'm the best Monopoly player in the world. You come here and then all of a sudden you've only got one dice and you're only getting $100 around. And you're like, this is, yeah. And then it all falls to pieces again. And then everybody around the game, right? Not only the coaches, but the boards and things, they forget those advantages as well. They forget that if you're coming from the Crusaders, which is a great system, it's all done to somewhere which is less fortunate, it's going to be different. That's the kind of linking that analogy, right?
And part of it too is I remember talking to Ryan Hoffman, who his daughter goes to school with my son, and he was talking about when he went to from the Storm to the Warriors. He was absolutely, when he arrived, said, I'm going to turn the Warriors into the Storm.
Yeah.
And after 6 weeks, he's like, what am I doing here? Well, this is not I can't do this. Razor gave me a similar experience he had when I think he went to Perpignan. It's like, I can't make this into what I was hoping to make it into because one, these players have been doing this for 10 years, right? So make them trying to change the way they do something. It's like they have to be the best version of themselves or the most appropriate. And so the things you're talking about, like just because of the system you had where you were, as in the way you do things, worked, doesn't mean it's going to work here. Because what's going to take is a whole bunch of people to learn a new thing and unlearn the old thing. And I made that mistake when I coached at Suntory. I literally destroyed their line out. I'm like, well, hang on, I've got 92% success here and 87% success here. And then we were in a game and the players just blanched. They just panicked. We almost lost the top. Like we went undefeated through the whole season, but it wasn't because I was doing anything right. It was literally, I was so convinced my system was better and it nearly destroyed the team. And it was like, I just should have let them do what they do and make the minor techniques. I mean, I remember reading a book, and it was the Australian cricket captain, and he was talking about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in terms of destroying teams. And one of them was like telling a young player or a player with an established technique to change, or trying to coach them and trying to make what they're doing better. And it's like, just leave him, right? It's just, give small piece of advice on something you can do within the construct of the system, but trying to teach a 27-year-old guy to relearn how to bat. Like, why are you doing that? And part of it as coaches, like we want to justify our existence, right?
Well, and you also know what you know a system too, and it's easier. It's a default pattern, right? But
It's a self-defense mechanism.
yeah.
Well,
Well,
I want to use this because I'm useful with this.
yeah.
I'm completely useless with this system. I don't know it.
Yeah.
But what does it do when you introduce that new system? So we talk about cohesion. We talk about different forms of it. So there's interpersonal understanding and then the system understanding. And system understanding is how do we do something, a technique, individually or collectively. So you get in a car, you turn on the indicator and the windscreen wiper goes off because it's on the other side because it's a different car, right?
Yep.
Or people go to London, they get hit by a bus because they look left as opposed to looking right.
Yep.
It's the innate way we do things, and under duress we revert back to how we've done it before. So we talk a lot about system change will actually mean your cohesion that works against you. If I go to the Crusaders as the most cohesive team and I try to change what they do, and I say, you absolutely have to now tackle this way, I can render them completely useless, right? Because they've been doing it for so long that half of them will learn it right, half of them will do it quickly, half of them do it slowly, and so we just will have a complete mess. So that's when we find sometimes a coach will imprint their system on something and they can actually take a very cohesive team and they will underperform. And
So
we
there's
actually think the NRL, the more experienced a coach was, the more they underperformed in their first 10 games at a new club.
Really?
Yeah. Because the kid, the assistant coach from the other place is like, I don't think I'm going to change anything here. I'm not sure. And the senior players here. Whereas when a guy comes in and goes, we're going to do it like this, it takes some, quite a lot of adaptation for everyone to get used to it. Des Hasler at the Titans this year would probably be a good example of that.
What's he done?
Well, he's come from, he was at Manly, had a brilliantly well put together team, went to the Bulldogs, had some success, gone to the Titans. They've just fired him at the end of the season. The Titans were not, they're not terrible, but he played a lot of guys out of position that they're normally used to, as an example.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know the inner workings, but he's a very experienced, very successful coach. And they were saying, in interviews with the players, it's just going to take us some time to get used to how Des does things. And unfortunately, he ran out of time. So
Yeah.
You had the end of season, you had Des against Wayne Bennett, and both clubs almost got the wooden spoon. Fortunately, the Knights, in their usual fashion, came from nowhere to pull it off. But yeah.
I think that's a fascinating point, man, about the system change, because I think all coaches, you have the system you like, that you enjoy, that like your own car, right? With all the buttons in the right places.
Yeah.
And it takes you time to flip to what the new car's like, rather than trying to.
And waiting is so hard, and not doing anything is so hard. We all have this need to come in and make a change, right?
Yes.
They're just looking at you like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you not taking any action? Because I just want to wait. And particularly as a young coach, you feel the need to take action, right?
Well, you're getting it from a lot of angles, right? Like to actually just sit back and let things roll.
Yeah.
Is almost not in the coach's DNA a lot of ways. That's not what coaching looks like, sitting back and just observing, right?
One point I just wanted to mention too is that one of the challenges with boards we find is they only want to get involved in the club when the team isn't winning. They only sort of like they're not. If we go talk to boards and say to them, you really need to get a good understanding about where the club is at, and if you're actually heading in a positive direction in terms of sustainable development or whatever it might be, and then they'll say, well, no, you go talk to the coach. And I'm like, okay, well, what if you start losing? Do you have an understanding of why you're losing, perhaps? Like you might have had a whole bunch of injuries to your back row and your back line, and you don't necessarily have the depth yet, and you're going to lose, the last 5 games. And if you compare it to last year, you might go, well, bugger it, we'll sack him. So the boards only tend to really be interested when things are going wrong, and then they become performance experts. I remember when they were sacking, one of the AFL coaches this year, or I can't remember who it was, and it was just recently, and I was watching the CEO, and he's saying like, you need to understand we should be in the finals every year. Why do you think that should be the case? Because the AFL is really hard to make the finals every year to be consistent. You really have to take a long time to reload. You put yourself back together again to have success. Or we should be top 4 every year. Well, it's a very competitive system. So we try to at least give them at least an understanding of like everything takes time. And then sometimes you'll just have a stack of injuries and you'll come 10th. And that's where you should be. But then panicking and sacking the coach is the worst possible thing you can do, because the new guy will have a whole different set of ideas about how to do things. Like when Eddie came in to coach Australia, right? It wasn't that he was a bad coach. He's had a different set of ideas, and you generally don't want to do that 9 months out from a World Cup.
For that exact reason, right?
Yeah.
And so that's obviously like a lot of those English soccer teams are big examples. They sack coaches 3 times a year in some cases.
So
don't
the
they?
championship, I think the average is 8 months. I think Brazilian football is 3 months. AFL is 5.5. I think that's the longest of any competition in the world. NRL is 3.5. So we're actually Australian competitions are quite relatively stable.
Yep.
There's a lot more paddock stations, and because you have promotion relegation, and promotion relegation does really messed up things to people. Like that, in order to not to be promoted, they're happy to lose money to take the risk that they might go up because the rewards are so great, but they're so worried about losing and coming last. Like all you do in the NRL, the AFL by losing is win a wooden spoon, right?
Yeah.
And if that's where you should be, that's where you should be. And whereas the ramifications in promotion relegation systems are so dire,
Especially at a big money competition like the Premiership in England,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's an interesting point. It's that's the psyche stuff. Like coaching has those stresses around performance, but then the bigger club does too. When there's that sort of edge to it, right? Like when there's the financial hit you'll take from being relegated is massive pressure.
And pressure from the fans too, like the big clubs, the pressure that comes, from, because people get embarrassed, board members get embarrassed. And so they want to take out that frustration on you as a coach. They're going to spit on you in the street and stuff like that. Like it's all the power and none of the, so it's all the responsibility and none of the power to change it.
Yeah. And you talked about that Chernobyl example, and you're talking about like it's easier to blame a person rather than a system, essentially, right?
Yeah.
That's what you made that reference off here about. Yeah, the communism was the example in that case, but like it is interesting, right? It is, to have that scapegoat, that person that, it'll all be better when we change that person or we get that guy or that girl into.
And it's only when
everything.
you then look at things holistically, right? If you look at the history of, say, the Waratahs or the Newport Gwent Dragons or whatever, or different coaches, if you look at it en masse, you can see, okay, this coach has not fixed the problem. They've been through, 9 different head coaches in 11 years. I mean, one was a really interesting one, which is the Parramatta Eels, that by just changing the tenure of their board, dramatically changed their outcomes. So they had Dennis Fitzgerald there for a really long time, and he was reasonably successful. They won 3 titles in the 80s. They made the 01 grand final. And then Dennis, I think, left a little bit after that. He was there quite a long time. And then they'd said, okay, well, we're never going to have anyone with more than 2 years on the board after that. So that was their response to somebody being there for a long time. Maybe they didn't think it was that effective. So, okay, so everyone who was making decisions on the board was like, well, everything we do, we have to win inside the 2 years I'm here. Right. And I had some conversations with the CEO about that, about him saying to them, no, we need to be thinking long term. And they're like, no, why would we do that? Because none of us are going to be here to see the outcome of that. So it's just by changing the timeline of things, of how long your tenure is going to be or how long the input is going to be, can have a dramatic impact because you're just thinking short-termism, right? Whereas actually saying, like, wouldn't it be great if, if I said to you, Ben, you're never going to be relegated, okay? And you're at Newington, right? Right. Yeah. Every win the first 15 has for the 10 years after you leave, you're going to be given $100. You'd be down coaching the 6-year-olds next week, right?
Yeah, mate. Like,
because you build a system, and imagine if they said, okay, well, we're not really sure if you win this year, but we want to be winning in 5 years' time. That just completely change your outlook, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't it? Like that's an interesting scenario, right? Like a different, because you're right. And this goes to coaches too, like around contract length when you're signing coaches, that the mental aspect to that. If you sign a coach for 1 year and say, well, we'll reassess at the end of that year, as opposed to signing for someone for 5 years, it says something to the coach about what you're trying to do as a club, right? And
I think the hardest coaching Ferguson ever had to do was probably his first year. Once he'd won 2 or 3 titles, he just would have known his contract is going to go indefinitely unless something goes absolutely horribly wrong. So he was building dynasties that he knew we're not going to win it this year, but I reckon 2 years' time we'll be there. Like that's just such an entirely different conversation rather than if we don't win the title this year, I'm out of a job. So when we talk to people about cohesion, they're like, but you don't understand, I have to win tomorrow. We're like, yeah. So maybe as a coach, only part of this conversation can happen with you. It's got to happen with the board. It's got to happen with the governance to give you that time to do the things you need to do in the way you want to do them to have success. Because, like this is the problem now with the Panthers, is that no one really knows how to take the Panthers on. It's just a different team losing to them in a grand final for the last 4 years because they built a juggernaut. That started in 2013 and it wasn't perfect, but now it's almost, as of this year, it's been a huge reload, but they're still in the finals again. Yeah. And do you think Cleary's worried about his job?
Yeah.
Couldn't care less. He's like, well, we've done with this year, we'll probably win it next year.
Yeah.
But everyone else is thinking, how do I win a grand final? How do I get to a grand final within 12 months? So you kind of like, as boards, sometimes we need to take that pressure off the coach.
Yeah, well, it's interesting what you're doing with Gainline is this sort of data is perfect for those higher echelons because a coach can only control so much, right? They can't control this bigger picture stuff unless you're in exceptional circumstances.
Yep. Every dynamic in every club is different. Like Ferguson at Man U, he ran the club himself, right? He was basically in charge, would control the board, all the conversations. Bennett at the Broncos for a long time would have been in control of the club. But you can only get that through having a very, very well-built advantage in a way. And Bennett lost that because they went away from singular feeder systems. So they ended up sort of, in the end, they felt like they had to fire him. Then they brought it back. Then that didn't work again. But this kind of sense of, like, if you can have that control and you can have that advantage. And the great thing with Bennett is when we've spoken to him, he's like, no, I get it. I know I had a huge advantage at certain times in my career. And Bellamy's the same. It's the interesting one is it's only really coaches who've only ever won. If they've won and lost, they can see both sides of the coin.
Yep.
Because for those people, they've only ever played Monopoly in this game once against this person.
Yeah. They've stayed. Right? They like the feeling of having the advantage, so they just keep playing that. Oh, no, I'll just keep these two dice. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm not playing another game, man. I love it, mate. I also love the phrase you used last time, which was you don't find the solution, you build it. And around this cohesion thing. And I think that's a really cool thing about your data, which your data shows a lot of, is you actually got to build this cohesion. You can't make cohesion.
Well, the problem is expectations, and sometimes it might be, okay, we change a combination and then it works, but it's also important to understand what you're up against. So if you're playing, let's use the lowest cohesion team ever played Super Rugby. Let's say you try a new combination, you're playing the Sunwolves. You're going to win that game. You're going to make 10 line breaks. So that works in that game. The next game, you play the Crusaders, you make no line breaks and they break 7 line breaks against you. Well, then you don't say, okay, well, it worked in game 1, but it didn't work in game 2. It actually worked as well as it should have in both games. Does that make sense? So it's about understanding what have we got, what are we up against? And then because when teams lose, they panic. In fact, Pat Ferguson, who was one of our founders, and he actually was at Harvard Business School, they did a study with Geelong Football Club. And what they did is they looked at, or it might have been Melbourne University, he's there now as well, I apologise. What they did is they looked at how the coaches responded in their reviews of individuals in games where they either won by 6 points or less or lost by 6 points or less. Because that's basically one kick. So it's one shoelace. And so they looked at how they reviewed the individuals. And when they lost, the reviews were profoundly different when they lost as opposed to when they won, even though it literally was the difference of one kick or a shoelace or a hand or something like that. And so I think as coaches, we tend to overplay when things go wrong, the need to change or the need to be harsh on people. And we overplay the need to be optimistic and positive when we win, even though in those circumstances, those specific circumstances they looked at, the difference was literally nothing. We've all done it, right?
Yeah, 100%. You lose 3 games by 1 point, and you think you're just doing terrible, but there's something in there, but it's not as bad as probably the reaction you're going to have.
Yeah, well, we might say you should have lost all 3. In fact, you did great to lose by a point.
Yeah.
Fantastic outcome, right?
That's right, mate. Interesting, and that's, mate, and that leads us to that word, right? Like we were chatting off air about the phrase "interesting" when coaches pull that one up, and I think this is a cool concept, mate, to throw.
So it comes from something we've heard over the 13 years now, which is when you describe something that runs against someone's narrative, their own personal narrative.
Wait,
they say,
just to context this first, Ben, this is when you
Yeah.
go into teams and you present the data about cohesion, right?
yeah,
And
sorry.
you're almost slapping it in the face of coaches around things. And then,
Yeah, I'm not trying to slap. I'm trying to let the data slap them in the face. But let's say we present to you, and we say, Ben, here's your time at, Team A, and let's say you've gone undefeated through the season, or you won 9 out of 10, and we might say, to be fair, Ben, the results you got there is you had a fundamental advantage over the rest of the competition. You obviously did quite well, but there's no, I'm not going to say absolutely categorically you are good or you are bad, but absolutely all the results you got are within range. Okay. And, you won 9, you lost 1, you did great, but it certainly doesn't show us, for example, that you're coaching above your station. Because every other coach who's got the same has either won 8, 9, or 10 games out of 10. That's the moment at which coaches normally say to us, interesting. Because if you have, as a coach, you've built up a narrative of yourself like, I won 90% of my games. I'm the best coach that's ever been. I look at the success I've had. I've never had a year like that. And I really feel like I did this, 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 and this. And you might have done those things. And whether they made a difference or not, we don't really know. And you might have done the same thing in other years, right? I mean, a lot of the data we look at, we might say a club has done A, B, C, D, and the next year they've also done A, B, C, D, and they've got a completely different set of results, right? Let's say it's going and doing pizza nights, or let's say it's going and doing, I don't know, whatever it might be, whatever you feel is going to make a difference. I mean, I remember when I was at Northern Suburbs, our club basically decided to buy a title. We won one of our first 11, and we won the back 10. And the thing we put it down to was like a night where we all went and sat down and had like a pizza night together. We're like, it's after that night, everything changed. Like, well, the next week we did play Penrith, which was the worst team in the comp at that point. The numbers, I can guarantee you, would have been catastrophic. and we did decide to keep the same team, and then we won, and then we kept the same team next week, and then we back-ended through the season, very similar to the Eels this year. And then all of a sudden, we made the grand final. We looked great. But so then when I went and coached Norths, when we were like 1 and 10, I'm like, let's go do the pizza night, and we did it. And we just kept losing the rest of the time. Like, it was like, okay, well, that's out of the way. So, there's so many concepts like that we tend to have, either superstitions or ideas, that if I do this and it works, and then we'll go and try it somewhere else, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe I didn't do it the right way, or maybe, maybe it didn't make a difference in the first place. Maybe it did. I don't know. But we all tend to hang on to these certain individual things that we think is actually going to make a difference, and may not be doing that at all.
Yeah. Well, I always remember those times in the amateur era where coaches would be in the change room, and I had one time where they whipped off a bed sheet and there's a pallet of beer there, and I was like, we're not leaving this change room till this is gone. And that was like the defining moment of the season, a massive booze up instead of a training. I can't for the life of me think how that worked, but
there are times when it's worked and there's times when it hasn't, but maybe they're not related. Maybe it's not related to what comes. Maybe it is a little bit. Maybe there's stuff that needs to be said, but I've done just as many honesty sessions, and it's made no difference as honesty sessions have made some difference.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, mate. It's your stuff is fascinating, man, because you're putting this little lens on, just exposing some of these traits that coaches and wider staff have in organizations, which are really human traits, aren't they? They're not, their gut feels, they're emotional, and you're putting these hard sort of things on that, hard data on the numbers. And I think it's awesome. If I may, Benny, there's a couple of little things from our last conversation, which I'm keen just to drive in on a little bit more. You talked last time about that talent versus cohesion piece, where the numbers suggest that, the numbers are pretty categoric, that the cohesion is hugely important. But when can talent be so strong that it outweighs the cohesion piece? Like, how is there a measure of that? Like, can you put a measure on an X factor player?
so what we've done is we've looked at different competitions around the world and how they're constructed, and then how they're acquired, how talent is acquired, and then looked at different sports, right, where it makes a level of difference. So doubles tennis, for example, is actually becoming less cohesion orientated because pairs just aren't playing together the way they used to. They don't run tournaments where guys have played 50, the Bryan brothers, for example, who won like 20 years in a row. Like they were a pair of identical twins. That's like the most cohesive pairing ever, right? But no one does that anymore, okay? So you can basically throw a team together now and win a tournament because everyone else is probably thrown together as well. But also doubles is you've got two people in a game together.
Yep.
Right? So the context of this is going to be different across each different competition and each different sport and each different role. But let's take football, for example. So EPL.
Yeah.
You've got teams that are spending, let's take 2 years ago, last time I did a really hard look at it. Man City is spending 1.15 billion on their wage base, and Sheffield Wednesday is only spending 150 million. Poor buggers, they got no money, right? So if Man City and plays Sheffield, they have the same level of cohesion, Man City will win because they have more skill.
Yep.
Right. Now, we found that there's like a thing called a Z-score, like the correlation of something. We found that the biggest, that money did make more difference in the EPL because there was such a dramatic level of skill differentiation between the top teams and the bottom clubs. Because the top team was spending 10 times more than the bottom club.
Mm.
If you make everyone have the same amount of skill, in other words, spending the same amount of money, cohesion will make a much larger impact to performance.
So if there's a salary cap, say?
The salary cap.
Yep.
So with the EPL, money is making a bigger difference than cohesion. Cohesion is coming a pretty close second by all the data we have. But that's because there's 1.15 versus 150. If you shrank it down, you said, right, 600 to 400, cohesion would be making a greater contribution towards performance. But the thing with cohesion is it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
It's actually free, right? So then you can actually come back to a number and say, okay, for each 1% you have a TWI, it might make, I'm going to throw a number out here, $27 million difference in those leagues. Rugby league, not so much. But, one of the things that we've looked at quite a bit is that, and forgive me if I've explained to you this before, the low cohesion clubs don't make players better at the same rate as the high cohesion clubs, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're basically, everyone pays everyone like this. My first contract was like $20,000 for the first year, 50 for the second, and 100 for the third.
Yeah.
Right. So we pay people because we expect them to get better over time. Okay. Now the low cohesion clubs is the players will be paid like that, but their skill improves like that. They're 20 in the first year, 30 in the second, 50 in the last. So at the end of their contract, the club goes, you're not playing to the standard of what we're paying you. Right? Now, there's a club we've been talking to for a long time that said that to us 3 times. We're paying overs on so many of our players. They're at the third year of a contract. We're paying them $1.5 million, and he's only paying like an $800,000 player, right? So that club's there, and the norm is there, whereas the other really good clubs are here. Okay, so you build a really well put together system, and the player is improving so dramatically. You're paying him, 20, 50, 100. But he's playing at, 50, 200, 600, right?
Yep.
So those teams have a $20 million team on a $10 million budget.
What are those good cohesion clubs doing? Like, is this not just more time in? It was just better time and better quality time better coaching?
It's like, if you let's take an individual sport, right? Let's say one thing that tends to happen a bit, and let's take gymnastics. Like, let's say in Australia, we have some good coaches, but we feel like we've got to import coaches. Okay, so when a kid is between 6 and 9 and she's doing the pommel, they bring in a Chinese coach, and that kid learns the Chinese way to get onto the pommel or to jump or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. I'm just making it up. Then all of a sudden, Simone Biles wins a whole bunch of gold medals, and they're like, we need to go to the US system. Okay. So they take someone's assistant coach from the US, they bring them across, and they say, no, this is not how you get on a pommel. You're going to have to get on this way. This is the way we do it in America. So that 9-year-old till they're 12 is now having to spend 1.5 years to learn the old way, to learn the new way, and unlearn the old way. And therefore, she's not actually developing her detail very well. So she never kind of develops at the same speed, right? Then, whereas the Chinese, the same system all the way through for 25 years, right?
Yep.
Then when they get to 12, they say, oh, look, the Russians have won more gold medals now. We're going to go to the Russian system. New coach comes in, he goes, I want to do it the Russian way. And then the kid has to start again. Okay. So if the club is constantly trying to find a new person to run the program and changing how they do things, then you're not going to get that much better. You're not going to get to the level of detail of how to do something because you're having to stop and adjust. So if a club is constantly new players, new teammates, if I have a new hooker next to me, I got to teach him how I want to do things or how he wants to do things. I have to adjust to him, depending on when he's senior or not. I have to talk about this is how I like to bind. We need to do about 500 scrums first before I start to get comfortable with him. Right? So some guys never leave the club, but the club is constantly changing for them.
Yeah.
It's like a new club every year. And I remember talking to an analyst to the club in the UK, and he's like, I've had 9 different head coaches and 7 different owners and 300 or 400 players come through this place. Like, when is he going to stop? When is this chaos going to stop? So, so in chaos, no one gets better. Right? Players don't really get that much better in France. It's like when refugees move countries.
Well,
right?
just on that French one, you mean just because the way they play, it's a little bit all over the show a little bit more?
Fundamentally, there's basically 2 clubs that are really well built. Toulouse and Clermont were basically generally the really well built clubs in terms of long-term sustainable development.
Yeah.
And so if you go to those clubs young, and that's what the French are actually finding, importing guys at 25 isn't working. Importing them at 17 now seems to be working.
Yeah.
And if you look at Mayalata, when Mayalata went across to the NFL, his coach at Philadelphia said he's perfect because he's a blank canvas. I have nothing. There's nothing I have to unteach him from college, right? So I think a lot about it's more about purity of experience, right? So it's like if you're constantly bringing in people from other places with other techniques, you have to change what they do, or you adapt to them, or there's a chaos there. Whereas like if you just constantly get in the blank canvas, like you teach kids at 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐜𝐫𝐢𝐻𝐿 how to pass, right? But try to teach Aaron Smith to change how to pass. He's not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you might do. I don't know. But is that your experience, like of senior players? It's hard.
Well, absolutely. You have to earn something. You have to have a niche which would suggest that why he would listen to you. And you have to. I
remember 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐿 saying to me that he was trying to teach the guy in Japan to pass the way he thought he should. And this guy was yes. But then he watched him in this game. He hadn't changed it at all.
Yeah.
And he said, why doesn't he change? It's like, because that's how his university coach taught him how to pass. Now, I'm not saying that's great because 𝐬𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐿 shows you how to pass, adapt, right? But that's just over there. They just, whatever their sensei taught them, that's the technique now for life.
Yes.
Right.
And Japan's a very slow moving change sort of place. As you know.
100%.
But I think it's interesting too that also that like what you sort of suggested there too was there's a lot of different ways to do it, the Russian, the Chinese, the different ways of that ballet. But there's not necessarily any one is particularly the right one. But if you just have one and you say, we're going to get really good at this way of doing, and that's going to be the way we do it from now forthwith.
And the great strengths are built off your weaknesses.
Yes. So you just chip away at the things which aren't good.
Well, or it's a response. So like maybe Australian backlines became so good because we didn't have forwards that were big enough. Right?
Yeah.
Or I think about, did I talk to you about Bumrah?
No.
So the fast bowler, like, how he's got like a 4-step runner?
Oh, yeah.
And everyone's now copying the Bumrah technique. And it's like, why do you bowl like that? And he's like, because this is the length of my driveway. Right? It's what I had. So a lot of the times the techniques we use will actually be built off the environment we're in or the surroundings we're in. Okay. Like the Bulls probably went to a kicking game because they had mat field and they're at altitude, right?
Yeah.
Whereas other scenarios, maybe you've got muddy grounds, you play in the forwards, whatever it might be. So going to a club that's winning and copying their techniques doesn't make sense, because what you're actually doing is copying an adaptation to a weakness that you don't have.
Ooh. Adaptation to a weakness you don't have. An adaptation to a weakness you don't have.
So we all. So do you want me to
Yeah,
re-explain it?
elaborate on that. I'm just chewing that one over in my head, mate.
Do you want to say it again? Okay.
Yeah,
So
I've said it to myself 3 times. I'm trying.
yeah.
trying
Okay.
to.
So let's use the Bulls as an example. Okay. So the Bulls, let's say they played a kicking game because they knew they could get 60 yards out of a kick. Okay. So they play a kicking game, therefore they play line out defense. They also have Victor Matfield as an example. But let's say because they're kicking so much, they have to do a lot of defensive lineouts. So if we're going to do a lot of defensive lineouts, let's practice a lot of defensive lineouts. Let's get really, really good at it. Right. And then because, maybe we get those, we then become quite good at mauling. Okay. Now that is all an adaptation to altitude.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you watch the Bulls play and they win the title. And you're like, they're kicking 75% of the time. So we're going to go to the Bulls and we're going to hang out with them and look at their culture and all this sort of stuff and the things they do. But maybe if we just copy their kicking game, that's an adaptation of something that we don't have to deal with, which is altitude.
Yeah.
Right. Teams like I remember St. Joseph's College generally had really small props. Right. Well, Joey's doesn't have a lot of kids. You're quite small years of groups. And one of the advantages they had was boarding, right? But St. Joseph's College generally had smaller players playing in the flank and go with smaller players because there was just not a lot of kids at the school. And the more kids you have, the more likely it is you'll find a big unit rather than a small unit. So if we don't have a lot of kids, we've got to find a way to adapt to that. So we're going to play a fast game. We're going to play quick ball out of the scrum. And then you become really, really good at it. But you don't copy that, because you might be a really big school that's got day boys and you have huge units. Why are we copying what Joey's are doing?
That's exactly right, mate. That brings you back to the first one. Where you've actually got to wait and see a little bit. You can't just rush in there and do something because the All Blacks are doing it, or the Wallabies are doing it, or the St. Joseph's are doing it. Another one, which I was a part of this one too, is with the Aaron Smith example, the Highlanders never had the biggest team. So part of Tony Brown's philosophy on attack was we're carrying in that pod to trap people. And we're using Aaron Smith's long pass so we can trap more people by him getting a little bit more distance. Therefore, that was the style. So every halfback had to do that. Therefore, the Highlanders didn't have running halfbacks because that wasn't the way they played. So guys that were running halfbacks didn't do as well for a little period there because that wasn't the game style. And so I always found that a real interesting mix of why they were doing what they were doing to suit them as a team. And the Blues wouldn't do that because they had forwards that could carry and knock over guys and pick and go and dominate that phrase. They didn't have to trap numbers. They could just play.
And there's a long history in sport of coaches taking responsibilities for adaptations that teams are making and seeing it as tactical genius, whereas sometimes it's just like the players going, this isn't working. Let's do this. And the coach goes, okay.
Yeah.
And then 3 years later, they're like, why did you decide to play this way? I really thought it was going to be to the strength of the players we had.
Yeah. It's actually what had happened with he walked out the room and the players went, we're not doing that. We're going to do this. So just nod and agree.
Yeah, I'd be really interesting as a coach to put a camera in a room, because I've been in those rooms where the coach has walked out and the guy goes, okay, guys, now we're going to do this.
Well, I can tell you World Cup teams that have done that have gone on, that have actually closed the door and gone, if that, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
At World Cup level.
Yep.
Which is incredible, right?
So the notion of talent versus cohesion, yes, but it's very expensive. Right? It's very, very expensive. And if you're doing a lot of acquisition, you'll be more unstable, which means your ability to adapt will be harder. Okay. And the point I was going to make was, if you look at people who move from overseas who are like refugees, right?
Yep.
So they're not able a lot of the time to adapt all of the things in their life to then be an entrepreneur who has a lot of success, right? Because they've got to adapt to language, adapt to system, adapt to driving on the other side of the road. Everything's just really hard when you're changing countries, okay? But their kids are able to have success, right? Because they're not having to deal with the same level of adaptation. They grow up in the schools and have to change languages. So sometimes with a club, it's like, we just have to stabilize here first so the next generation has a shot. Otherwise, if we just keep bouncing around with different people all the time, we'll never be able to develop anything ourselves.
Stabilize so the next generation has a shot.
Yeah.
Geez, that sounds like a political movement, Ben.
Sorry, no, it's just the notion of creating an environment that's stable enough for kids to be successful. If you look at education outcomes for kids who have to move schools a lot, like in the Navy and Air Force and stuff, it's really hard, right? It's constantly moving makes it really hard to, and you know, people sort of say to us, well, I don't know how much difference cohesion makes. It's like, it's not that, it's chaos. What does chaos do to people? You know?
Mate, that's the other piece you don't often talk about. Like on this show, we often talk about all the culture and the cohesion side, but you don't actually reference the chaos side, which is the other side of things, right?
Yeah. And how everyone talks about stability when you don't have it.
Yeah.
We just need to just settle down for a couple of weeks, right? You know,
Yeah.
when you've got it, no one talks about it. Everyone just thinks it's the norm and they're doing great, you know. So I'm cheating here. You had some more questions after that.
I do, mate. I was really wanting to dive into it a little bit, mate. What do you think? Like last time we talked, mate, like the one a couple of people wrote in about is, what if you can't wait? Like, and this was from CEOs, like leaders in business. What if I can't wait 3 years? Because you said last time it's about 2.8 a season to reach peak performance post transfer. But what if you can't wait 2.8 years?
Well, can you wait a day? Because cohesion's, it's not like it's 2.5 years and flick, all of a sudden it's working. It's moving all the time. And the most dramatic change is on the first day, right? So we've done a lot of kind of work in this. We do we do Lego together, right? So we do it the first time, we get a score. Let's say we have 11 minutes. Every time we ever do it and we don't make any changes, the average improvement between round 1 and round 2 is between 41 and 46%. So the first time you do something together, you're diabolically bad. The second time you do it, you're say 41, 46%, and then it keeps on reducing, right? Yeah. So the most important aspects is the first day, right? So a team, when you don't change a team, it dramatically changes day to day, game to game. So if you look at Parramatta, game 1 of this year, Storm put 50 on them. It was a massive variance in the cohesion of the two teams. The last game, the Eels put 30 or 40 on the Knights. They still would have lost to the Storm had the Storm had the same, but they would have been a lot closer. Okay. So yes, it takes 2.5 years to get to peak, but just 10 games can make all the difference in the world. Just one game can make a huge level of difference. It's just how catastrophically different it is between 1 and 2, or, you know, how much it improves between that. So it's not, I can't wait 3 years. It's like, whether you like it or not, it's moving all the time. It's changing all the time, and it's changing at different speeds, at different rates, depending on the relationship, depending on the position, depending on the context. And so when you don't change a team, it changes. And when you do constantly change a team, it's just the same shit with different people. Sorry for language.
No, it's good.
But it's like the Knights, I love the Knights, but it's the 20th anniversary of their 2005 season where they lost by 40 points to Parramatta, 50 to Parramatta, and came last. And they celebrated 20 years by doing it again. They're in the same spot. They're just in the same place 20 years later.
Yeah.
Some clubs are just repeating the same stuff with different people.
Yeah. Right. And that's that loop you get into, isn't it? You talked about in the last show. Yeah,
it's a downward spiral, because you make one change. Let's say I change a line out and it's just too much information to the players. So it doesn't work. So I get rid of another player. He comes in and he doesn't know any of the lifts. And so they sack me as a coach because the line out goes to crap. They bring in a new coach and he says, I want to bring in 3 new players. It just goes boom, 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 boom. Like it's one bad decision can lead to a tumble down effect that can, and the problem is with Cohesion is it's generally, you know, it's a slow build back to get it back to the same point, but you can drop it really, really fast if you make a big enough effort. It's like a house. A house will fall down really quick, slow to build.
Yeah, I love it, mate. Hey, Benny, mate, I could talk to you for hours, but I do like to put a cap on it because about the hour is the commute. A lot of the listeners do. So we don't want them to be leaving with 10 minutes to go, mate. So I've got one more question for you, and it's not the normal question. It's a different one for you because you've answered that in the last show. This one is about you, mate. You talked in the last episode about you once wanted to try beat these numbers, and you went hard to try beat some of this data. If you were coaching now, what would you do differently to work with, not against Cohesion? What would be your one takeaway for coaches starting up because you know the feeling of you wanting to prove and say, I'm going to turn this thing around. What would you say? What is it to work with Cohesion, not against?
So that's from a prior conversation, but I think I must have misquoted myself or something because I think it was a coach had said to me, I tried to beat the numbers. I want to beat your numbers. That's my sort of goal. I've never coached having done this work. If that makes sense.
Yes.
But if I was to coach now, the first things first is context. Is what am I looking at? What am I up against? So if let's say you're, game 1, I'm at level 2 for Cohesion, the opposition's at level 10, and we get absolutely spanked. My next goal is to try to get Cohesion towards level 3 because I can't get to level 10. And so that's my focus for the rest of the season is to try to keep building it as we go, knowing that if we keep building it, we've got a shot at getting towards 6 and 7. And then we can start beating some teams that are going to be below us or we're the home team. But to beat teams that are 10, the next goal is to get within 40 of them or get within 30 of them. So that's the context. The second context is individual performance, is that we know certain positions are going to be harder than others. So center pairings, 10, 12, 13, tends to be much harder to adapt to than wingers, for example, or props, more of a power position. But there's going to be components. So where do we work as a team? Where do we work as individuals? The next part is the guys who are more experienced, they might find it harder to adapt coming into a system than a kid, right? So a kid might come in and play really, really well, and the older guy really struggles, but you need to understand he's finding it harder to adapt because he's having to unlearn a lot more. So maybe we need to have some patience because if we throw him away, we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater because he's got some fantastic understanding across this level. I think the next thing is about my communication with those above me. And you have to have it before the season or before things start to go wrong.
Yes.
Because if you go to a board saying our cohesion's terrible, they're like, too late now, dude. If you lost 5 in a row, using this as an excuse. If you can go to a club and say, listen, I know you've hired me and we do want to make some changes, but to be honest with you, I'm looking at this going, this is going to be a really difficult year. We're completely reloading here. And if you look at, when Parramatta lost that first game, he basically said, I take complete responsibility for the amount of changes I made to this team. It's going to take some time. Right? It was exactly perfect response. And I'm sure he probably said that to them before the season started, right? And so that would be I suppose the next part of the context. But also too is understanding enough to know that when we're winning, it's not necessarily me that's making the winning, it's the players making the winning. It's the organization that's making the winning. So maybe not get too carried away with my own rubbish if we are winning, because it can change very, very quickly. Like Bellamy's record in Origin only tells you that, as he even said to me, like, now I understand Origin a lot better because of why I necessarily couldn't win that. Because they had that period where Queensland won, I think, 10 or 9 or 10 years in a row. That was just a huge disadvantage for him. And And the interesting thing about that is, like, is he a great coach? I think he's a very, very good coach. But in talking to people around him, they're not saying he's like a genius. The problem is the press, right? The press will portray them as geniuses, and the press will shift. You know, a player will play well and part of a great team, and they'll say, this guy is, one of the greatest players in the history of the game. Not necessarily understand the context. They'll say about another player, this player is simply not up to it. And sometimes it's the same player. They've just forgotten when they said it before. Right?
It's fascinating, mate. Interesting is the phrase, isn't it? Interesting. Hey, Benny Darwin, thank you very much for your time once again. Episode 2. For the listeners, if you haven't listened to the first one, get on there. It's absolute gold. Dives deep into the data, and Gainline Analytics is just a sensational company which is actually unlocking a whole lot of not just the data but the coaching psyche and just smacking people in the face with actually what is actually out there. So Benny, before you go, if people want to know more about Gainline Analytics and what you do, where can they find you, and what else do you do?
So we present to people on Cohesion. One mistake that people say to us, well, that's all very good and well in sport, but this is corporate, it's different. And our response to that is the original research. A lot of it comes out of military data, HR data, hospital data. We've just applied it to sport. We've taken a whole bunch of other things people have done on Cohesion and sort of synthesized it and then studied sport in the same light. So a lot of what we're talking about actually comes from corporate work. But we also present to corporate. We measure corporate teams. We've been measuring the ASX now for about 10 years with some really interesting results. And so, we fundamentally see teams as the same in all types. So we are on gainline.biz is our website. We're also on Twitter, LinkedIn, or you can find me, yada, yada, yada.
Mate, thank you for your work. Thank you for your time, sharing this sort of stuff. It goes a long way to helping coaches and leaders be better versions of themselves, mate. So thank you for joining us once again.